So we're going to do the same format. I'm going to give each person 2 minutes to do their intro. Lorne has let me know he's suffering from a bronchial infection, so he may run out of oxygen as he's trying to speak this evening, so be patient with him. And let us begin. I think we'll start with Donna, because she's new.
Sure, throw me to the wolves, see if I care. Okay, sorry for all the paper here, but I'm a writer. I feel more secure if I have paper to collect. I'm running for office because I feel I can't sit on the sidelines any longer. The next 4 years are crucial for regional government. Major decisions must be made about our water supply, garbage and recycling, and more, and we'll be living with those decisions for decades to come. I've followed local politics for a long time. As a reporter for the local weekly, I attended SCRD, Sechelt, and Gibson's council meetings. In fact, I'm the only person on the coast who attended all 3 governments for the last 2 years. I also did extensive background research to make sure that my reporting was thorough and accurate, so I'm completely up to speed. When you live in a rural area, you have only one representative at local government. If your director does not represent your concerns, there is nobody else at the board who will listen because you're not a voter in their area. Therefore, it's vital to have a director who not just attends meetings, but listens to constituents, reads all the agendas and reports, does extra homework on the issues, asks key questions at meetings, and communicates back to Area E residents so that you know what decisions are or aren't being made that affect this area. If elected, I will publish a regular newsletter for constituents, keep an up-to-date website, and report in person or in writing to the community associations. We have a water supply emergency on the coast, not because we lack water or because the SCRD wasn't aware of the problem, but because the people elected to make difficult decisions have failed to take action for years. Elphinstone residents need a director who will face our urgent problems and deal with them.
Thank you. Let's see, I started volunteering in the Sunshine Coast in 1982, have worked at various volunteer public service and community service, and finally elected in 2005 to oppose restructuring, which was successful, and that's why we're all in this room today, and have gone on to speak to many things to do with local government over 155 months of service. On the topic of water, started out first infrastructure meeting in November 2005. Following that, we had the local board of health for the Sunshine Coast Regional District took on the Western Forest Products, who were logging in the watershed. A year after that, the board was one of the few places to send elected people to something called the Water Summit, which was introducing the new Water Act as it was being brought out. And then several water workshops that I've attended since. Now, it's easy to be critical of this last board accomplishments on water. But I have to say that I did not vote for any of them except for the wells. The Chapman Creek Expansion Project I opposed consistently and roundly. You can check my voting records on that. I have advocated for sustainable and diversification in our water sources. And an example of, and this is vetted by an engineer, of a sustainable move for water would be to hold back about 1/2 meter of the spring freshet in the lake, so that it'd be 1/2 meter times 31.7 hectares, an awful lot of water anyway.
Thank you, Lorne. Thank you, Donna. Okay, so we have a number of written questions that have been submitted, and I'm going to try and group them and make them into one question, some of them. So this is for both of you. You each had a role in the restructuring of West Howe Sound, Gibsons, and Elphinstone into one municipality. Please describe that role.
McGee?
Okay. So the question is, or the statement and then the question, you each had a role in the restructuring of West Howe Sound, Gibsons, and Elphinstone into one municipality. Please describe that role.
Yeah, I was elected to oppose that. We had a referendum in November of, had a referendum in November 2006. I was elected in 2005, and so this was how my first year in local government went. I took 6 months off of work, so this is my regular paid job, so I could fight this. And as I mentioned earlier, we're here because that fight was successful. As the electoral areas voted 70% opposed to joining the club. So a lot of people in this room were active in that, and so we owe thanks to a lot of people for standing up for our community and keeping us where we're at today. Thanks.
Well, here I was, a relatively new resident on the coast, having just quit commuting, and I saw an ad in the newspaper that said, we're looking for volunteers to sit on this committee about possibly amalgamating areas E, F, and Gibsons in a new district municipality. And I thought, oh gosh, that sounds interesting. I guess I should volunteer. So I wrote a letter and I applied, and they didn't take me. And then after a while, the members of the committee started dropping off like flies. And they started, going down through the pile of applicants, and I got chosen to go. And silly me, not knowing anything about local politics at the time, I thought, oh, this should be interesting. Well, it was. You know what it's like being a duck in the front of a shooting gallery? I do now. It was a pretty horrendous experience. At the time, I supported restructure because I thought it made sense. It was indeed voted down quite dramatically by the rural areas. The town voted in favor, the rural areas voted against. And I think it's a dead issue. I think the stake is through its heart. I don't think there's any reason to believe if we did it again, we'd get a different result. And besides that, we've got a whole lot of bigger issues to deal with right now, like water and garbage and everything else. I'm not willing to waste my time fighting a battle that's 12 years old.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions here about water. Let me try and put them all together. Okay, I'm going to have a shot at making 3 questions in one. So once a site is determined for a reservoir, how long do you anticipate before it's online? And how long before we could alleviate our water problems?
Well, according to the SCRD's latest staff report, it would take 5 to 7 years to get a reservoir online. I don't know if that's a conservative estimate or what. There will be a better estimate coming forward to January's meetings, probably. Initially, they said they'd have it in Q3 of 2018, and then they said they'd have it in Q4 of 2018, and now it's Q1 of 2019, but it's in the works. In the meantime, it's going to be a challenge to figure out our water supply, but we've just got to start managing our water a lot more effectively than we are now. We could get wells online faster, and I hope that we will. They're test drilling right now on McMahon Road, if anybody hasn't noticed. There's a lot more. Here's some steps that I think that we could take, actually. We could meet with the 25 largest industrial water users and see what they can do to increase their efficiency and reduce their summer water usage. We could work with Sunshine Coast Tourism to make sure that all the accommodations in restaurants have low flush toilets and other water-saving measures. We can work with farmers and prioritize water for agriculture. And we can enforce the blasted regulations. I mean, water restrictions are meaningless if there's no enforcement.
Thank you. Going back to, I'll start where I stopped in my introduction. So, if you pull together a very small, not very invasive impediment to the flow of water in the channel that leads into Chapman Lake, you can hold back what is 158,000 cubic meters of water, which that's half a year's production for Chester Well. To give you some perspective, there are 4 wells being tested right now. There's Grey Creek well. Grey Creek has a really good, strong aquifer. The District of Seashell Works Yard has big wet spots in it, and so there's we know that there's water on site. We just need to test it to make sure how good it is. And then, of course, they're drilling in Grantham's Landing in the ravine there, which has a really good solid well there now, but it's not very deep, so it doesn't produce a heck of a lot of water. A Chester well in summer produces about 7% of the water that we have. So if you're bringing on 4 more wells, that's going to really diversify our water supply and not make it so dependent on Chapman, in other words. It's, you know, that's a really important thing. The reservoir, depending on the site. The site's really important, and there are some big changes coming in the area around the water treatment plant, and those changes will be in the newspaper, but it may be easier for us to find a site in the near future than it was in the past.
Okay. I'm going to paraphrase this one. How can your years of experience be a benefit to the new board of the CRD, particularly because there's going to be a bunch of rookies?
I started in a year that had 3 rookies. Donna Sugar was a rookie, even though she'd served for a fair bit of time as Adrian Belshaw's alternate. Gary Knorr was a rookie, I was a rookie, and if it wasn't for the mentorship of John Reese from Pendant Harbor and Lee Turnbull, who was in her second term, then she skipped a year, it would have been pretty chaotic for us to function. Our only instructions would have come from staff, and you don't want staff telling the directors how to do their job. It should be the other way around. And so it's really important to have mentorship. I've got, in addition to just the 155 months that I put in, you've got the events that have come along, the restructuring thing, the local board of health, all kinds of courses that I've taken through UBCM and Local Government Leadership Academy. I just received an honor at UBCM for the education I've taken, so it's a level 3 certificate of accomplishment through local government. I'm one of a very few people that has achieved that in this province, and it's a province-wide award. So I've been diligent about my education. I've been diligent about attending meetings, and my experience goes really deep because the board for the previous 9 years was a really active board. We brought in all kinds of programs and studies, and we had to chase down our own money for some of them. So I've been experienced with chasing down money as well for getting programs done. And I know an awful lot of the ministers by their first name in this government.
Well, I'm going to argue that I am in fact up to speed because I have been attending all the local government meetings, not just the SCRD. So I think I have a pretty good picture of what's going on in the coast and how much the local governments in fact don't talk to each other and don't know what's going on. I would also argue that I'm bringing a much wider scope of experience to the table. If you read my brochure, you'll see that I have a very wide range of community involvements and a lot of contacts on first name basis with many people too. So just a few highlights of things that I've done. I sat on a regional economic development committee for the Gibsons area and worked on a number of economic development initiatives during my time with the Gibsons Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of the Loans and Investment Committee at Community Futures and a founding board member of the Coast Community Investment Co-op, which invests in local businesses and social enterprises that improve food security, provide meaningful work, foster environmental sustainability, or create affordable housing. I sit on the Sunshine Coast Trails Committee, which brings all types of trail users together, like hikers, cyclists, equestrians, ATVers, and snowmobilers, etc., to plan and manage recreation in collaboration with BC Timber Sales and the community forest. This is a really valuable model because it brings people together and proactively heads off conflict in the woods before it happens. In August, I organized a workshop with Elections BC on the new campaign financing rules and invited all local government candidates. I'm starting out the way I mean to go, by bringing people together and building bridges.
Okay. Let's see if I can read this writing. If elected, where do you see transportation and housing in the next 5 years in the SCRD?
Okay, well, as we all know, our roads are literally crumbling under our wheels or feet on the Sunshine Coast. I think it's been 20 years since the last major work was done here, which was the Rat Portage Hill passing lane. Unfortunately, the SCRD doesn't control the roads. They are the responsibility of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, with the maintenance done by Capilano Highways on a contract that is negotiated by the province without any significant input from the SCRD. The only thing that we can really do that is going to be effective is to work with the other local governments to lobby the province jointly for improvements to the road and a plan for the future. I don't see any plan for what's going to be done to our roads. They're just like filling the potholes. All our local governments have got to be on the same page. I've heard this from people that I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people, is that in the past, the governments have gone individually to the minister and contradicted each other. Well, that's just a recipe for inaction on this part of the province. So we have to get our act together on the coast and be effective in lobbying the province for improvements here. To go to housing, that's another really, really difficult one. It's very you know, we know that the situation is out of our control with the crazy prices of land around here. And we also know that developers aren't building modest homes for people who actually live and work here. They're building luxury developments to lure people from other places like Vancouver or Alberta or overseas. This is one of the most affordable places on the coast, so, and we have to work to keep it that way. There is potential for infill of secondary suites. Okay. I'll get to this later.
Thank you. Yeah, roads are a frustrating thing when you're electoral director. We have had many long discussions with Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. I'm pleased to say that having fought over ferries for so many years, that Claire Trevina and I know one another quite well. And so at least we have a fairly clear path of communication between us, and Nicholas Simons supports anything that we're trying to do with roads here. So we have really good communication, just not much power. So and we have to accept that. We have lobbied for some changes and improvements in the road maintenance contract. So that was opened up to us earlier on this year, in probably late winter, and we went over it, and we were allowed to try and push for some changes in it, and we were pushing for changes in maintenance. I guess we will see what the ministry is prepared to allow us. On the topic of housing, I spent 5 years working hand in hand with CMHC on their rural and native housing program as they were applying it here on the coast. And all I could say about housing on the coast is that unless the feds come to the plate, there's very little that the local governments can do, because we don't have the depth of taxing. And the only thing we can tax is your house, and does taxing your house make houseable more affordable? I don't think it does.
So our next question is about Gospel Rock, and it says, what have you done and what will you do regarding access to Gospel Rock for our local area?
Thank you. Well, at the NDP convention last November, I sat down with Claire Trevina for about 20 minutes going over the maps and explaining Gospel Rock, how it was going to affect us, and what the transportation options were for that. And so she got quiet and started to, on my tablet, go through the maps, and she looked at me and she said, what a mess. To encapsulate that, they can only make suggestions to the town, right? Which they have done. So they've made suggestions to the town. They cannot demand that the developer pay for anything, because development takes place in the town, right? So the town can say that the developer should build up Chester Road, put a proper roadbed on it, but only the town can do that, because that development's in town, and they can ask the developer to do that. I don't have any authority to go and ask that developer to do that. I don't have any authority to ask the town to do that, nor does the minister. So if the minister doesn't have that degree of power, how would you expect a local electoral director to have that kind of influence? That's what we're faced with here. So I can't go pushing the town around, and having gone through the restructuring issue that we went through in 2006, I don't want the town messing around in our jurisdiction, and they certainly don't want me messing around in theirs. So that's really clear. So at any rate, unless the town gets a twinge of conscience and wants their developer to start developing roads and safety accommodations here, we're not going to get it.
Well, in the course of preparing to run, I have been going around talking to a lot of people, including politicians and staff at the town, past mayors, the fellow we thought was going to be the next mayor of the town, the fellow who may be the next mayor of the town, if one of the four going for it right now. Anyway, what's going on right now is that the road through the town that needs to go through to Gospel Rock is currently stalled. And what we need to do is work with the town to get that project unstuck. If they have to expropriate some land, and we need to, talk to the town, talk to residents, get some pressure going to do that, because there has to be another route to Gospel Rock.
That's the end of the written questions I have in front of me. Looks like there's one more, and I'm just going to speak.
My name is Mike, I live in Elphinstone. I had a couple of questions. One was about roads, but you've answered that. There's nothing you can do. I was hoping that maybe we could get a left turn signal on Veterans Road, or a light, or some other access, but you don't have any. I didn't know if you did or didn't. As far as affordable housing, do the directors have the ability to change zoning and increase density? Because I think that would help with affordable housing. And I think that if we looked at the OCP and amended it or updated it, it could be time. And again, just because I think that increasing density would have more supply. So that's, I don't know how you feel about that.
Funny you should mention this. There are OCP amendments going to the board on Thursday for all the rural areas aimed at improving opportunities for affordable housing by creating more density in what are called neighborhood hubs. And an example of a neighborhood hub is Langdale. No neighborhood hubs have been identified for Elphinstone for the reason that the sort of the logical areas closest to town are mostly in the ALR. And, frankly, the place to put density and affordable housing is in 20 minutes walk of the nearest grocery store. What we do have in Elphinstone, we have 5 mobile home and RV parks and another one coming on Fitchett. And mobile home parks are great. They are affordable housing. Lots of people live there, and they're great neighborhoods. I used to live in the one on Harry Road. We do have potential for infill of secondary suites and second dwellings on half-acre properties. Only about 10% of the properties zoned for 2 dwellings have 2 dwellings. The SCRD needs to help people actually figure out how to do that, because most people are quite daunted by the prospect of putting in a secondary suite or another dwelling, because it's complicated and there's zoning and there's regulations and stuff. So they need to put together a package that's a step-by-step, this is how you do it, to help homeowners. I don't think that we could put financial incentives, although it would be nice. Another thing to look at would be development cost charges. For example, right now, the DCCs for a 4,000-foot house on a 2-acre property are the same as for a mobile home pad. And that's a disincentive to affordable development. So we need to look at changing the DCCs so that they're on a formula or a sliding scale that would encourage developers to do more affordable housing.
Thank you. So what Donna says is true. And our APC, Advisory Planning Commission, debated the number of changes to do with the housing density, neighborhood hubs, and there was a report by planner Yuli Xiao on that. That was discussed at the community association at the Advisory Planning Commission, or APC, and they sent the recommendations back to the board. That's going to amend all the OCPs, and some places will get more opportunity than others. So that is how that will happen. DCCs are aimed at land, not houses. So if you want to put the costs up on smaller houses, larger houses, you have to do it in scale with building permits. And building permits are issued on the basis of the cost of the permit. So if you're building a small house, your cost of your building permit is going to be small. If you're building a big house, the cost of your building permit will be large. But the cost of developing the land is what the DCC charge, the development cost charge, is applied to. So that's how that works.
Just one more, if I could, just quickly, there's some people behind me. You talked about garbage and recycling, and I was just up at the recycling today, and there's so much, I take so much there, and I think that if we had recycling picked up and we had a place to drop our garbage off, it would be a lot easier.
Lord, you should have done that.
Thank you, Tony. The service of picking up, of collecting garbage at the recycling site is a business decision on behalf of the person who runs the site, so the contractor. Okay? So we don't, we pay for garbage to be picked up at the house. That's how it's taxed for. That's when you pay your utility bill, that money goes into a financial pot that pays for the garbage to be picked up at your household, right? We can't take money out of that pot to pay the recycling contractor to pick up garbage. They can charge you though. That's the rules. That's the law.
I know, the things have changed now where we're recycling so much and throwing away so little.
Yes.
It would make more sense if we're paying taxes to pick up our recycling.
Yeah.
And we can drop off our garbage.
As I said, it's a business decision on behalf of the contractor, on behalf of the recycling contractor. And they can collect garbage, they can toss it in the bin, that bin can then go to the landfill and get dumped. If I am correct, the previous contractor was charging $1 a bag for, or proportionate amount to accept your garbage at that site. So, but we can't take money out of the curbside pickup of garbage to pay the contractor to do that at the recycling depot. They can ask or negotiate in a fee that the SCRD would, that'd be extra money for recycling to operate that service. However, they haven't done that.
Well, as it happens, the board has voted to go to curbside organics recycling pickup in the new year for the rural areas. But I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet, whether it will look like what they've done in the town, where they've gone to, I think, 1 week on, 1 week off, like 1 week garbage, 1 week recycling. It's also unclear what's going to happen to Gibson's Recycling because their contract expires in November. And staff at the SCRD say they've been talking to Gibson's Recycling, but I haven't seen any substantive reports. So, and with curbside pickup coming, how is that going to affect Gibson's Recycling? I mean, I think most people like that depot very much. They provide excellent service, and we want to make sure that we keep them. I'm generally speaking horrified that there's no plan for what we're going to do with our garbage when the landfill closes in 7 years. I can't believe there's no plan. The new board has to move on this immediately, or we're gonna have another emergency on our hands, like the water emergency, only kind of smellier. Some other things that we could do, we need some improvements to our services to combat illegal dumping. One of the reasons that people dump illegally is because it's quite difficult to get rid of certain things. There's fees, or you can only go one place, or in the case of drywall, just try and get rid of it. I mean, it's a horrendous exercise that the province has put us through. So we need to find a way that householders can drop off small amounts of problem substances. We need a transfer station for the garbage so that weekenders and tourists and other people can drop off their garbage. And there's currently no legal way to dispose of invasive plants.
Hi, I'm George Smith. I live in Gower Point Road. I want to come back to water. I'm one of those people in this community, and there's more here, who've been fighting for over 30 years to try to get the regional district to get off their cans and actually do something. And the only director, I have to hand it to Lorne Lewis, who's been firm that they're on the wrong track and has tried to force them to do the right thing. That was Lorne. However, that was, thank you very much, but here we are now. Both, I see two decent people running for this office. I want to know more about the guts of what you're going to do to actually move this thing forward. I am so tired of the baloney that's an inaction of everyone on the board but Lorne. So for both of you, where do you see that going?
Well, it seems pretty obvious to me that the issue of this election all across the coast is water. People are very concerned, and understandably so. I don't support the Chapman Lake Drawdown Project, which is a scheme to blast a trench and install a pipe so the lake can be drawn down another 5 meters. It makes us more dependent on one small alpine lake for our water supply, and believe me, it's a small lake. If you haven't been up there and looked at it, it's small. It's also, once the SCRD has sunk $5 million into this project, they're going to be tempted to make it the answer, but it's not. It's a short-term solution to a much bigger problem. We need the reservoir. We need it as soon as we can, and we're going to have to work on all of the options to get us through the next few years until we can get the reservoir online. We get a lot of rain here, so we shouldn't have to choose between people and salmon. But we've been placed in that situation because the SCRD has failed to take action when they should have done it years and years ago. The regional water plan, passed in 2013, is based on starving Chapman Creek of water. For years, the fish hatchery complained that not enough water was being released into the creek, but it wasn't until 2016 that the province stepped in and forced the regional district to release a minimum environmental flow. That reduced the effective storage in Chapman Lake by 20 to 30 days, which is why we're likely to have a water crisis every summer until we get a reservoir. And the only way we can deal with that is to start managing our water really, really effectively.
Thank you. Yes, water is a problem. I'll be the first person to admit it. As a matter of fact, we go back to something that I've referred to earlier on, and that would be the local Board of Health. I'm often quoted for something I said in that about our water supply. Said we don't have a shortage, we don't have a problem with our water supply, we have a problem with our supply management. And so that was in 2007. The subsequent boards have not jumped on board with the idea that we should have a reservoir. I've campaigned for a reservoir with the directors since that point in time. So mostly that's fallen on deaf ears. And on the Chapman Creek expansion project, or it keeps changing names because it wants to keep avoiding attention. What has happened there is, so you can draw the lake down, okay? With the Champion Creek expansion project, you can draw it down 8 meters, okay, from its normal level, so that's 8 meters. You can draw it down 8 meters with the siphon, which we already own, and requires a little bit of work to operate. So you're paying $5 million to get what? Water. Nothing. Okay? So I've opposed that and opposed that and opposed that all through this term. I want to see a reservoir. I've made it clear for years that I want to see that, and I hope that on this board that we get directors who jump behind that and push it forward. So, but I have also mentioned a way to easily get 158,000 cubic meters of water in the springtime.
Hi, Lorne and Donna. I'm Kathy. I live just down the street in Elphinstone. I'm wondering what the problem is with slowing down or capping the development on the coast based on the water supply. If there's not enough water for current residents, why are we putting in big tracts of development that attracts out-of-town buyers?
Yeah.
People often don't like when I tell them the truth. So here's the way the law works. That any piece of property that exists in British Columbia can be subdivided to its zoned maximum. Okay, so the local government, if you walk in with a subdivision application to cut your 4 acres into 8 half acres, and that's what the zoning is, we don't get to interfere with that. We get to say your subdivision application is according to the zoning, and you can go ahead with it. Right? So that goes for all zoned property in the province in any locale. You don't get to turn them down if they're applying for something that they're legally allowed to apply for. Same goes with a building permit. People can build on any lot that they have, provided that they're building something that is within the zone regulation. So it goes back to zoning. What's the zoning? Single family dwelling, you can build up to 35% in a family, like a residential one, residential 2, 35% of the lot size, that's the coverage you're allowed. So you think about the ability of that to use up water on a half acre or larger lot. That's a lot of bathrooms, that's a lot of people. But we're looking for housing development. We can't stop people from doing what they're legally allowed to do without getting sued. That's it.
Basically, I have to agree with Lorne. The laws in this province are stacked fairly heavily in favor of development, and that makes it very difficult to work with. One thing we don't have on the coast and should have is a regional growth strategy where all the local governments agree about where growth should happen. And we need that going forward, and we may be able to at least come to some understandings about where we're going. The SCRD, when it gets referrals, say from Seashelt says we're going to build an apartment building, do you have water? And the SCRD says yes. What the SCRD can do in their referrals is they can say, yes, but we have a seasonal water supply problem. All developers should be aware that we don't have an adequate water supply to see us through the summer, and you should, act accordingly. The other thing I think that all the local governments could do is improve our requirements for buildings. Because, the buildings that we have right now are energy hogs and water hogs. But we can build better than that. We can build passive buildings. We can require water catchment in multifamily dwellings. There's lots of things that we can do to improve our practices on the coast. And ideally, again, all of us local governments should get together and move in the same direction.
My name is Demir from Elphinstone. The town of Gibsons doesn't have as big a water problem as the SCR does because of their aquifer. Are you willing to drill in Elphinstone to that aquifer to get the SCRD more water, or are you willing to ask the town of Gibsons to provide water for near Upper Gibsons people that are actually being supplied right now by SCRD water, so in order to provide more access to water for the SCRD?
Oh, this is a fun one. The town has volunteered essentially to supply the entire town with aquifer water. Right now, their zone 4, the upper town, is getting its water from the SCRD, but that bulk water purchase agreement is coming to an end, and it looks like the town will be able to supply itself, which is great for them, and bravo. Who does the aquifer belong to? Well, that gets into kind of a sticky problem, doesn't it? Because the town is understandably very defensive about their aquifer. They care a great deal about their water quality, and they don't want really anybody else but drilling into their aquifer. But their aquifer is supplied from the slopes of Mount Elphinstone in, Area E. So it's our aquifer too. So I think the main thing is that, yes, hopefully we can all use and share this aquifer, but we have to take very good care of it. And I think that part of the reason that the town has been so, well, I don't like to say combative, but they've been very cautious about the idea of the SCRD drilling on McMahon into their aquifer is because there is a lack of trust. They feel that the SCRD is going to do bad things. And, this lack of trust between local governments is something that needs to be rebuilt around here so that we can all work together. We all have to drink the water. We all need to share it.
Thank you. Yes, I've been calling the aquifer the Mount Elphinstone aquifer for years, as do most of the people in West Howe Sound and people who pay attention to the aquifer. It doesn't belong to the town. The town does have a water license on it, and they have mapped it, mapped out the aquifer boundaries and done an extensive survey on it. So they have a water license on it. They've just recently made an application to expand the use of that water license, which is, as Donna referring to, that is the first step in them moving away from or weaning themselves off Chapman water for the upper areas of the town, so the zones 2 and 3. And they expect that in return that we won't be drilling the well. I have a really good relationship with the town of Gibsons, though it's a cautious one. We talk openly about the aquifer and have done, and openly about water supply. And I look forward to, on a new council, having that kind of relationship. The town really does want us not to be drilling into the aquifer. There's other aquifers we could be drilling into that would give us good water supply. And for them, the political animosity that would develop from us going into that aquifer, I don't think would be a positive thing. So, yeah, I've spoken against developing the McMahon well and spoken for them getting off Chapman water. And I'd say on this issue, the town and I see pretty much eye to eye. So I guess we'll see how that develops. But they know that it's time to move on, and so do we.
Okay, we're coming to the end of the evening, so I'd like to give each candidate 2 minutes to summarize their what they
feel they'll do if they get elected.
So, yes, there are two really large things that are region-wide that need attention. Water, we already know. The landfill, we already know. We will be doing a landfill search. We are aware that we have to do that. We don't want to be in the same position as Powell River, who have no landfill and ship all their garbage off down to Washington State to a processor. So so we're actively going out there to find a new landfill site. We have employed different technologies to increase the life of the landfill, as well as we're going to be trying to work out a plan where, as Donna has mentioned, your compostable waste or organics is going to be picked up at curbside, taken off to a place where it can be composted. That'll keep that out of the landfill, and that makes up a large portion of what goes into the landfill. Now, how do we know it goes into landfill? Because people actually go and pull the garbage apart and file it into different piles. That's how we know what's in the landfill. I know that you wouldn't want that job, but there are people who do that. Something that hasn't been mentioned tonight, and I'm really surprised that no one has asked me about District Lot 1313 and the work that's been ongoing there. I can say that right now that I have received directly to me letters from the ministry asking for some conversation. Those letters say this is not for broad distribution, so I can't tell you what's in the letter, but there are people in this room who have seen those. So that because I'm allowed to not broadly distribute them, but there's people who've seen that, they know that there's progress being made, and that's like a 1 in 25 year opportunity that's being handed.
So, yes, we didn't get to block 1313 and a couple of other things. However, I have flyers, pick up a on your way out the door, and my website has a lot more information on the issues that I'm concerned about. It frequently feels like the SCRD is living on its own planet at the top of Field Road, and it needs to come down and talk to the rest of us. If elected, I will work to make sure that the board meetings are open and accessible. Right now, they make audio recordings of all the meetings, but they don't share them with the public. They should not only be sharing the audio recordings on their website, they should be videotaping all of the meetings and the committee meetings, like the District of Sechelt does. You can watch their meetings on YouTube. People need to hear the discussions that take place, because the minutes that they write up just have, somebody made a motion and it passed, blah, blah. They don't reflect the real issues that we need to hear about. I'd like to see the SCRD take a lead on regional issues like growth management and work more collaboratively with other governments to find solutions to divisive issues. And I'd like to see them engage the public a whole lot better. Actually ask the public what you think and then listen to it.
Yes.
I wasn't on student council in high school. I never imagined that I would be standing in front of a room running for office, but here I am, because I'm deeply concerned about my community and I think I can do a good job for Elphinstone. I believe that an SCRD director needs to do two things very well. Work constructively with other directors, staff, other municipalities, and especially community groups and individual citizens, and communicate back to the residents. The newspapers do not cover smaller issues that only affect Area E, and I'll bet that most of you do not have the time to read agenda packages, so you rely on your director to keep you in the loop. Please vote on October 20th and encourage your friends and neighbors to vote. Thank you.
I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Val to finish the evening on behalf of the Elphinstone Community Association.
Thank you, folks. I just want, somebody just